So this is a verbal explanation of Intro 10. Why do we die? Our 10th webpage on the introduction site. Well, it's on the introduction site biblecodintro.com, but it's also on our main site truebiblecode.com, intro10.html. So the biblical story is that Adam and Eve had one law upon them in the garden, which was not to eat from a tree. And the penalty for breaking that law was death. They could eat from every tree in the garden except the one tree in the middle of the garden. And they were, from a righteousness standpoint, like children. They were on their own in the garden. They had little in the way of experience. And just as if you give a child a set of laws, well, one law, don't eat the ice cream, or don't go into this room, or whatever. Just as you do that with the child, eventually the child will reach the age when he pushes the boundaries, and he will rebel, and he will exert his free will. I think I, Robot, the movie, covers this very well. The one thing you can be sure of, you give an intelligent being a set of laws, is that he will break them. And this is especially true of children who experiment. And so it was inevitable, due to Adam's young age, that he would break this one law. And the purpose of the law is misunderstood by all the churches. They say, oh, Adam screwed up and it's his fault that we're all dying. And it's true, he broke God's law, but he didn't screw up. Because had he not broken God's law, he'd still be in the Garden of Eden with no experience of good or bad. And you cannot progress in love or to divinity, which is the purpose of mankind. You cannot make that progression without growing up. And all that happened when Adam sinned is that the door was opened for him to learn good from bad, to learn about righteousness. Prior to that, he could do what he wanted as long as he didn't eat from the tree. He was like a kid. Nobody punishes a kid for doing something wrong other than, a young baby, other than what you've explicitly told him not to do. And even then one's very lenient with them until they reach the age where they understand or begin to appreciate right from wrong. And that's what happened in Eden. Mankind, through Adam and Eve, reached that age. Now, that whole talk I've just given, all 2 minutes of it, is probably a complete waste of time, because most people do not believe Adam and Eve were real people. And if that is the case, we need to look at Luke chapter 3, which lists the genealogy from Adam to Jesus. There are 77 people from God to Jesus, I think. God, Adam, and then his son Seth, all the way down to Joseph, or to Mary's dad, actually. And it's a maternal genealogy as expressed through the fathers of the women, because Hebrew is patriarchal, the Hebrew society. So genealogies were always men. Even the maternal line is expressed in terms of the husbands of the women who were mothers of Jesus and grandmothers and great-grandmothers of Jesus. That's a technicality. From the point of view of Adam, we know that Joseph had a father, and we know that Joseph's father had a father, etc., etc. And they're all listed. And we know David had a father, Jesse. And we know that Jacob had a father, Isaac, and Isaac had a father, Abraham, and Abraham had a father, Terah. And you just carry on with this game, and you have to reach a point where you say, well, I don't believe that this guy existed then. Because if you don't say that, you have to believe Adam existed. And we have the entire chronology of Adam. We have the genealogy in Luke 3, the maternal genealogy from Adam to Jesus. There's a paternal genealogy from Abraham to Jesus in Matthew 1, but that doesn't help with Adam. But we have the entire chronology. It was first done from Adam to Jesus and to Armageddon, actually. This chronology was first done by Archbishop Usher in recent times, in 18 something. He deduced that Adam was born, I think, in 4004 BC. He was in fact born in 4027 BC on Tishri 2, according to our scriptural interpretation. And you just get that by adding up all the ages of the patriarchs, and you find there are 656 years from Adam to Noah, and the flood was 2371 BC. And then you work out the descendants of Noah, which we all are, down to Abraham, and then Jacob, and then David, and then Joseph, and then Jesus. So biblically, he was a real person. He was not, however, the first man, because the fossil record speaks very clearly that there were humans prior to Adam. And here is where, this is not what this talk is about, but this is where a clever use of scripture helps. Jesus is described as the last Adam by Paul, which means that Adam was the first Jesus. So if you want to know how Adam came into existence, you look how Jesus came into existence. Now Jesus was a son of God, as was Adam, but he was actually born to two parents, Mary and Joseph. Likewise, Adam was born to two pre-Adamic parents, whose names we don't know. Because Jesus was the last Adam, and that's how he was born. So Adam was a Mark II human, or maybe more than two, because Adam was made in God's image, but man was made in the image of us, which is God and his angels who helped him create. And there's a difference between the engineering of the angels and the engineering of God. God's engineering is better. Adam was more intelligent than his predecessors, and the beginning of human history is coincident, pretty much, recorded history, with Adam. It all started around about 6,000 years ago, with the invention of the wheel and the invention of writing, and of course war and worship. Prior to that, all we managed to do was domesticate a few sheep, which can't be difficult. The reason Adam was more intelligent than his predecessor, pre-Adamic man, is that God managed, by better software, because spirits are software and bodies are hardware, which are souls, to give Adam a closer connection to his angelic brain than his predecessor had. So he was more angelic. The scripture says God made man a little lower than angels. Believe me, we're a lot lower than angels, if it wasn't for the fact that we have access to an angelic backup vehicle and angelic intelligence. Although how that access works, I don't completely understand. Certainly our memories are backed up, because we cannot store everything we need to in the brain we have. And certainly our dreams are from the angelic brain. Anyway, I'm going off topic. So, this guy Adam broke the law that God put on him, which he always was going to do. And the test on Adam was never really a test on Adam, it was a test on Satan. It was billed by God as a test on Adam, and Satan fell for it. And he couldn't resist the opportunity to kill Adam, or to arrange his death through Eve. Because Satan, prior to that, had been the patriarch of the entire universe. Everyone was created through Satan by God. So he had, if you like, maternal rights. And he didn't want to lose them. And Adam was a direct threat to Satan, because Adam was not created through Satan. He was the first son of God not to be created through Satan. So he was Satan's brother, actually. And no other angel was. They were all Satan's children. So this was the threat Satan wanted to eliminate. So, he ate the fruit and was sentenced to death. But he didn't actually die until 309.7 BC, which was 896 years after he sinned. He sinned on 3993, Nisan 14, the same day Jesus paid for his sin. And he was the same age that Jesus was when Jesus paid for that sin. He was 33.5 years old, and Jesus was crucified and sacrificed by, he was sacrificed by Caiaphas and crucified by the Romans on Nisan 1433 CE, at the age of 33.5, the same age that Adam was when he sinned, which is not a coincidence because he was a corresponding ransom according to Paul. So Adam lived to be 930 years old, and again the reader's probably thinking, this guy's lost it, nobody can live to be 930 years old. Well, yes, nobody today can live to be 930 years old, but 200 years ago nobody could, in fact 50 years ago, or 60, no one could go faster than the speed of sound. And prior to that, nobody could go faster than the speed of a horse. Sometimes mankind gets stuck into the mode of, oh, it's a boom, it'll never go bust. Or it's always been like this in my life, therefore it can't have been any different. No. There have been different lengths, maximum lifespans of humans. Today the lifespan maximum for Adamic humans is 120 years, the life of Moses, the length of the life of Moses. And prior to that it was 240 years, and prior to that it was 480 years, and prior to that it was 960 years. And in Adam's time the maximum lifespan for an Adamic human was 960 years. Adam had sons and daughters with Eve after they were evicted from Eden. And those children were dead, because Adam was dead. Adam was constructively dead. I mean, Adam was sentenced to death. So, well, why didn't he die then, you ask? Well, the answer is, he had a stay of execution on that sentence, which enabled him to procreate with Eve. And God permits us to procreate, so long as the children, without any reference to him, so long as the children we produce are constructively or judicially dead. Once Adam is dead, then the children he has are in the same judicial condition that he is in, because you pass on what you have, you cannot pass on what you don't have. And the sentence on man is entirely in our genes. You know, I mean, what kills us is age, and our body is programmed to fall apart after a maximum of 120 years, and normally is well before then. And that's quite a difficult thing to do. It's much easier to design a steady state machine than it is to design one that keeps going but slowly falls apart. I mean, we design machines that fall apart, but they're not designed to fall apart, they just fall apart. Man's different, he's designed to fall apart. I mean, where is the evolutionary advantage in that? And we are getting closer today to cracking the riddle of aging and why our genes replicate in a not perfect manner so that we fall apart. I remember when I was at Cambridge, we studied, well, I had to study cell biology, which I really didn't want to study, and there was some gene, I can't remember its name, that they discovered, which, and your skin cells replicate 7 times, and the reason they only do that was this gene, and they found that by removing this gene, or this enzyme, your skin cells could reproduce more than 7 times. The trouble was they got cancer and died. But the point is that we were beginning to crack, well, we've cracked the code of DNA, and we were beginning to understand how aging works. We know more about it today. And I thought then at the time, although I knew little about the scriptures, that we cannot crack aging, because if we do, we've beaten God. And you cannot beat God, you cannot beat a divine penalty. I mean, when the day comes that we stop aging, that will be when the penalty is lifted, not when we scientifically crack how to do it, because it's a penalty from God. But because we were that close to scientifically cracking it, I believe that the day when God fixed it would have to come soon, or we would indeed beat him. Hence I thought that the end was going to be in my lifetime at that point, although I had not much scriptural evidence for it, only scientific evidence. Okay, so the sons and daughters of Adam intermarried, which was okay because they had way better genes than we have, so they didn't all, come out with defective genes. Now, God zapped Adam and Eve when they left Eden, so that their genes changed from being indefinitely lasting and perfect copying to being finitely lasting. And the Bible describes our parents' loss of their non-aging static bodies as follows. And Jehovah God went on to say, "Here the man has become like one of us in knowing good and bad." That's after he'd eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, which is just a naughtiness indicator. When are you ready to be naughty? Because when you're ready to be naughty, it's time to teach you good and bad. And now, in order that they should not put, he may not put his hand out and actually take also from the tree of life and eat and live to time indefinite, it's assumed he has to do something, which is not written in the scriptures. With that, Jehovah put him out of the Garden of Eden to cultivate the ground from which he had been taken. Interesting scripture, isn't it? See, he was taken from the ground outside of Eden and put in Eden. Now he's sent back to the ground from which he was taken to cultivate it. So if the pair had remained in the garden eating from the tree of life, they wouldn't have died. So their bodies weren't aging in the garden. So God zapped their genes to the slowly dying variety that we all know at the time of their sin. We are told that God made them some long garments of skin to wear as they left the garden. He did this physically because they only realized they were naked after they discovered sexual desire. Because you don't care about being naked until you know what your reproductive parts feel like. When you realise that, you cover them up, which is puberty basically. And Adam only discovered sexual desire when Eve used it on him to get him to eat the fruit. It's not easy to see this from Genesis 3, although possible. We know this happened because the whole story is an archetype for the way Satan uses women to get men today. He tempts women into sin using their desire for status, and they tempt men into sin using man's desire for sex. And that is exactly what happened to Eve. Because Eve only discovered sexual desire when Satan introduced it to her, when he appeared to her as a human acting like a snake from the tree of good and bad. He didn't appear as a snake, he acted like a snake. He abused her desire for status by saying, "You can be like a god, knowing good and bad." And she went, "Oh, I can be like a god, wonderful." And he wasn't after Eve, he was after Adam, because Adam was the threat to him, not Eve. The threat to his matriarchal monopoly over creation, which gave him rights. It made him the boss of everybody other than God. And he didn't want Adam to have his kids, who Satan would not be the boss of. Oh, I haven't told you, Satan was the firstborn angel. He lost those rights to Jesus. He was the first angel God ever created. Every patriarch, his firstborn son, genetically lost his birthright to a later born son. I mean, Adam's firstborn, Cain, lost it to Seth. Noah's firstborn, get this right, Ham, am I right? I think so, lost it to Shem. Abraham's firstborn, Ishmael, lost it to Isaac. Isaac's firstborn, Esau, lost it to Jacob. Jacob's firstborn, Reuben, lost it to Joseph. Joseph's firstborn, Manasseh, lost it to Ephraim. And all this is telling us, in the biggest of the pictures, that the firstborn angel, Satan, will lose his birthright to a later born angel, which was Michael, who became Jesus. That was the greater bowl of soup deal between Esau and Jacob. Satan actually sold his birthright to Michael for a bowl of the red, and the red is Adam in Hebrew, and he got 6,000-year meal of human rulership in return for his angelic firstborn rights, which enabled Michael to fix not only man by ransoming Adam, but also the heavens. But I digress as usual. So, this is what Satan said to Eve. At this the serpent, which is a metaphor for Satan, who is acting like a serpent, said to the woman, "Ye positively will not die if you eat from the tree. For God knows that in the day of your eating from it, your eyes are bound to be open, and you are bound to be like God, knowing good and bad." Whereas God hadn't actually said that. God had said, "And Jehovah God also laid this command upon the man, from every tree of the garden you may eat to satisfaction, but as for the tree of knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat from it, for the day you eat from it, you will positively die." But Satan added to that command, which is the beginning of all satanic bureaucracy. Adding to God's commandments. Man loves to do that. There was a great advert by the UK referendum party in the old days, before the independence party, for leaving the EU, which was that God legislated 1500 years of Jewish law in 2 chapters of the Bible, Exodus and, well, Leviticus, Exodus, Deuteronomy, alright, 3 chapters of the Bible. And the European regulations on cucumbers were, I think, bigger than the Bible. That's man adding to God's law. We love to do that. We love to come up with laws that we think will make things better. But they're just an ego trip, and they make things invariably worse if they are in opposition to, or even adding to, the requirements of God, because God writes perfect software in minimal amounts of code, and he legislates perfect morality in minimal amounts of law. Man cannot do either. We write spaghetti and we legislate spaghetti, and we get tied up in knots. So when Eve stated and recited the commandment she felt she was under to Satan, she put it like this: the woman said to the serpent, "Of the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but as for eating of the fruit of the tree that is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you must not eat from it, no, you must not touch it, that you do not die." That isn't what God said. He said, don't eat from it. He did not say, don't touch it. He said, don't eat from it. That commandment was added to by Satan deliberately, so that he could get Eve to touch it and she wouldn't die, which is what happened, one presumes, although that's a supposition. But he lied to Eve, because he said, ye plural will not die. This is very technical. Eve actually didn't die, but was raptured into an angel when her human body died, because she didn't sin with her spirit when she ate the fruit, because she was totally deceived, according to Paul. And if you don't sin with your spirit, you cannot lose your spiritual life. Adam, on the other hand, did know what he was doing. He was not deceived. He made a conscious choice to go with his wife rather than God, because he loved his wife that much, more than he loved God. And he didn't understand that God loved them both. Adam probably reasoned that God loves me, he knew that. So if I go with my wife, God cannot kill me, and he won't kill my wife. Or he'll sort us out, even if he does kill us somehow. And he understood God's love that much. He didn't understand it quite enough, because God was going to save Eve as well, even if she sinned. He didn't get that. He thought he had to do the big hero act. Out of love, he chose to do that. So he chose his wife, and he went with her, knowing that it would lead to him having the same judicial condition as her, namely death. And Satan counted on that. So, Adam did die. He entered into the first death. Satan would have been able to say to Eve, look, touch the fruit, I promise you won't die. And the reason he was able to say that is he misrepresented what God's law was. He represented it was don't eat from it and don't touch it, whereas the law is only don't eat from it. So if you touch it, you wouldn't have died. So he used that to try and prove God was a liar, when in fact he was a liar. That was his deception. It was for this purpose that he deliberately overstated God when he was relaying it to Eve on God's behalf. But mankind, following his example, has been adding to the commands of God ever since. Jesus said, it is in vain they keep worshipping me. That's quoting a prophet talking about God. I think Jesus was quoting that. Because they weren't worshipping Jesus, they were worshipping God. Because they teach commandments of men as doctrines. See, it's one thing to add ridiculous secular laws, which happens all the time. The latest absurd attempt was, I think there's a Labour cabinet ministeress who doesn't like meat, and so wanted to make it illegal to not be a vegetarian. Which, in the kingdom, we will be vegetarians, but unbelievable that someone like that could be a minister. Yet, that's what we do. We just make more and more laws, believing they make things better, and they don't. But the beginning of that was Satan, who added to God's first law, to Adam and to Eve. So eventually Eve was seduced by her desire for status. She wanted to be like a god. Oh, knowing good and bad. Status, yes, give me status. And she was totally deceived. But Paul says in 1 Timothy 2, Adam was not deceived, but the woman was thoroughly deceived and came to be in transgression. So we presume that Eve had just reached puberty when she was introduced to Adam, so she had no concept of sexual desire. Adam had been in the garden since he was 11, that's covered in Intro 6, so he had no concept of sexual desire either. We can deduce that both Adam and Eve grew up around twice as slowly as we do today, since they had a much longer lifespan, and none of the pre-flood patriarchs had any children under the age of 29, and they weren't slow to procreate in those days, so they weren't able to procreate till 29, so in other words puberty was twice as slow. But they had these bodies that aged more slowly anyway. So in modern terms, Adam had the body of a 16 3/4 year old when he sinned at 33 and a half years old. Eve was presumably slightly younger. And once they realised they were naked, we read, and Jehovah God proceeded to make long garments of skin for Adam and for his wife, and to clothe them. Now the literal meaning of this is that God made some clothes to wear from animal skins. But the concept of clothing of our original parents is repeated, because it says he proceeded to make long garments of skin for Adam and his wife, and to clothe them. That's what a garment does, it clothes you. It's a repeated concept, successively repeated, and that means it has a greater meaning in the Bible code, because repetition in the Bible means a greater meaning, because every word has power and every particle of every letter has power. So a repetition must have power, so it cannot mean the same thing as the initial recital, or it's impotent. So the greater meaning is this: the long garments of skin are what we wear today. It's our bodies. Prior to that, they had indefinitely long garments of skin, but once they started aging, they were merely long garments of skin that they wore. They're human bodies. And God made them, and it was the last thing he made in the sixth creative day. Then he rested after Adam sinned from creative works, but not from all his other works. So we wear a bit of a shorter garment of skin today than Adam and Eve had. They had long garments of skin, 960 years actually, max. We have 120 years max, 8 times less. So the death penalty that God passed on our parents exists and is enforced entirely by our genes, our bodies. We die due to aging bodies, quite obviously, and these we inherit from Adam and Eve. We inherit them from our parents, who inherit them from their parents, blah, 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 all the way back to Adam, through Noah. So the sinner, the saint, the murderer, the doctor, they all die, not from whatever sins they may have committed during their lives, but actually from the death penalty executed upon our parents' genes, which genes we all inherit. Thank you.